Sarah Martinez had always been told she was too small, too weak, and too emotional for military service. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing just 125 pounds, she faced constant doubt from family, friends, and even military recruiters when she first walked into the Army recruitment office in her hometown of Phoenix, Arizona. Growing up in a working-class family, Sarah watched her older brother James return from his first deployment in Afghanistan with haunted eyes and stories he refused to share. Instead of deterring her, his experience only strengthened her resolve to serve her country. She spent months preparing physically, running 10 miles every morning before her job at a local diner and lifting weights in her garage late into the night. The recruitment process was brutal. During her initial fitness test, male recruits snickered when she struggled with pull-ups, and even some female soldiers questioned whether she had what it took for combat roles. Her drill sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, made no secret of his skepticism about women in combat positions. "Martinez, you better prove me wrong, or you're going to get someone killed out there," he barked during her first week of basic training at Fort Benning. Those words became her daily motivation. Basic training pushed Sarah beyond every limit she thought she had. While other recruits complained about the grueling obstacle courses and endless physical conditioning, she embraced every challenge. She memorized every manual, excelled in weapons training, and gradually earned the grudging respect of her instructors through sheer determination and skill. Her marksmanship scores were exceptional. On the rifle range, she consistently outshot recruits twice her size, earning expert marksman status with both the M4 carbine and M9 pistol. Her small frame, which many saw as a disadvantage, actually gave her an edge in precision shooting. She could remain steady and focused while others shook from fatigue. During advanced infantry training, Sarah volunteered for every dangerous exercise and difficult assignment. She learned urban warfare tactics, explosive ordnance disposal basics, and advanced first aid that would prove crucial in the field. Her instructors noted her unusual ability to remain calm under pressure and make quick, accurate decisions during simulated combat scenarios. When it came time for deployment assignments, Sarah requested combat zones despite her family's pleas to stay stateside. She was assigned to a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, supporting special operations teams conducting high-risk missions against Taliban strongholds. The culture shock hit immediately upon arrival at forward operating base Chapman. The base was a dusty, fortified compound surrounded by towering mountains and constant danger. Male soldiers openly questioned her presence, making comments about how she would be a liability when things got serious. Her commanding officer, Captain Mitchell, was professional but clearly uncomfortable having a female soldier in his unit. During her first briefing, he assigned her to logistics and supply duties rather than combat operations, despite her training and qualifications. Sarah accepted the assignment without complaint, knowing she had to prove herself gradually. She worked double shifts, volunteering for dangerous convoy runs to remote outposts, and learning the terrain better than soldiers who had been there for months. She studied intelligence reports, memorized local customs, and built relationships with Afghan interpreters who would later become crucial allies. 3 months into her deployment, everything changed during a routine supply mission to a remote checkpoint near the Pakistan border. Sarah was part of a 6-person convoy carrying ammunition and medical supplies to soldiers who had been cut off from regular resupply for 2 weeks due to increased enemy activity in the region. The convoy included 2 armor Humvees and a supply truck. Sarah rode in the lead vehicle with Sergeant Thompson, a veteran of 3 previous deployments who had initially been skeptical of her abilities, but had gradually come to respect her competence and dedication. As they wound through narrow mountain passes, Sarah noticed unusual activity in the villages they passed. Windows that should have had children watching were empty, and the usual groups of men drinking tea outside shops had disappeared. Her training kicked in, and she radioed her observations to the convoy commander. "Sir, something feels wrong. These villages are too quiet. Where is everyone?" she transmitted over the radio. Sergeant Thompson, who had been focused on navigating the treacherous road, looked around and realized she was right. In his experience, such silence usually meant one thing: an ambush was coming. The attack came just as their convoy rounded a sharp bend in the mountain road. The explosion from the improvised explosive device buried in the roadside rocks flipped their lead Humvee, trapping Sarah and Sergeant Thompson inside, while machine gun fire erupted from hidden positions in the rocky hillsides above. Sarah awoke upside down, blood streaming from a head wound, with the acrid smell of diesel fuel and burning metal filling her nostrils. Sergeant Thompson was unconscious and bleeding heavily from his leg. Through the shattered windshield, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions surrounding their overturned vehicle. The radio crackled with desperate voices from the other vehicles in the convoy, reporting casualties and requesting immediate backup. Sarah realized that help was at least 30 minutes away, and the enemy forces were already moving down from their elevated positions to finish off the survivors. Fighting through disorientation and pain, Sarah managed to free herself from her safety harness and check on Thompson. His pulse was weak but steady, and his leg wound, while serious, was not immediately life-threatening if she could stop the bleeding. She applied a tourniquet from her medical kit and dragged the unconscious sergeant to a defensive position behind the overturned vehicle. Enemy bullets sparked off the armored hull as she worked, but her training took over, and fear transformed into focused determination. From her position, Sarah could see that the second Humvee had also been damaged by the blast and was taking heavy fire. The supply truck had managed to reverse behind a large boulder, but its crew was pinned down and unable to provide effective counterfire against the well-positioned enemy forces. Sarah grabbed her M4 rifle and assessed the tactical situation with the clarity that had impressed her instructors during training. The attackers had chosen their ambush site well, with overlapping fields of fire from elevated positions that provided them excellent cover while leaving the convoy exposed in the valley below. However, Sarah noticed something the enemy might not have considered. A narrow ravine ran along the left side of the road, partially hidden by scrub brush and loose rocks. If she could reach it without being detected, she might be able to flank at least 2 of the enemy positions and create enough confusion to allow her fellow soldiers to reorganize their defense. The decision to leave the relative safety of the overturned Humvee and attempt a dangerous flanking maneuver would change everything. Sarah checked her ammunition, said a quick prayer, and prepared to prove that courage had nothing to do with size or gender. She radioed the other survivors, providing them with her assessment of the enemy positions and her plan to create a diversion. The convoy commander, Staff Sergeant Williams, initially refused to allow her to attempt such a risky move, but Sarah reminded him that without action, they would all be overrun within minutes. "I can do this, Sergeant. Trust me," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. As Sarah prepared to move, automatic weapons fire intensified, and she heard the distinctive sound of rocket-propelled grenades whistling overhead. The enemy was preparing for a final assault, and time was running out for everyone trapped in the valley below. Sarah low-crawled toward the ravine, using every bit of cover training she had received. Bullets whined overhead as she moved from rock to rock, her small frame allowing her to slip through spaces that would have exposed larger soldiers. The rough terrain tore at her uniform and scraped her elbows raw, but adrenaline masked the pain. Reaching the ravine unseen, she began her careful advance up the hillside. The enemy fighters had positioned themselves, expecting return fire from the road below, not from someone crazy enough to attempt a flanking maneuver through such dangerous terrain. Sarah moved like a ghost through the rocky landscape, using natural shadows and vegetation to mask her approach. 20 meters from the first enemy position, she could hear voices speaking in Pashto. Through her scope, She identified 3 Taliban fighters with an RPK machine gun that had been devastating the convoy below. They were so focused on their targets in the valley that they never noticed the small figure moving through the rocks behind them. Sarah took a deep breath and opened fire with precision that would have made her marksmanship instructors proud. Her first 3 shots dropped the machine gun crew before they could react or sound an alarm. She immediately moved to a new position, knowing the other enemy fighters would investigate the sudden silence from their comrades. The second position proved more challenging. 2 fighters with AK-47s were positioned behind a large boulder with excellent views of both the convoy below and the approaches from multiple directions. Sarah realized she would need to get dangerously close to have any chance of success. She waited patiently for the right moment, watching their patterns and timing their movements. When one fighter moved to reload and the other was distracted by radio chatter, Sarah sprinted across an open space and dove behind cover just meters from their position. The sound of her movement alerted one of the fighters, who began scanning the rocks where she had hidden. Sarah held her breath and remained perfectly still, knowing that any movement would give away her position and likely result in her death. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the fighter turned his attention back to the convoy. Sarah seized the moment, rising quickly and engaging both targets before they could react effectively. Her shots were accurate and decisive, eliminating the immediate threat to her position. However, the gunfire from her engagement had alerted the remaining enemy forces to her presence. Suddenly, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions as the Taliban fighters realized they had an American soldier behind their lines. Sarah found herself trapped between several enemy positions with limited cover and no clear escape route. Bullets sparked off rocks around her as she pressed herself against a boulder barely large enough to provide protection. Her radio crackled with urgent transmissions from the convoy below, reporting that they could see muzzle flashes from her position and asking for her status. "I'm pinned down, but still in the fight," Sarah responded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terrifying situation she found herself in. "Continue suppressing the positions on the North Ridge. I'm going to try to reach the high ground." What happened next would become the stuff of military legend. Instead of waiting for rescue or attempting to retreat, Sarah made a decision that defied conventional tactical wisdom. She decided to assault uphill against superior numbers, using speed, surprise, and her intimate knowledge of infantry tactics to turn the tables on her attackers. She began moving aggressively from position to position, using short rushes and accurate suppressive fire to keep the enemy off balance. Her small size allowed her to move through terrain that larger soldiers would have found impassable, and her exceptional marksmanship meant that every shot had to count. The third enemy position consisted of 2 fighters with an RPG launcher who had been preparing to destroy the remaining vehicles in the convoy. Sarah approached from their blind spot, using a dry creek bed to mask her movement. As she prepared to engage, one of the fighters spotted her and swung his AK-47 in her direction. The ensuing firefight was brief, but intense. Sarah's first shot missed as she dove for cover, and the Taliban fighter's burst of automatic fire sent rock fragments flying around her. Rolling behind a fallen tree, she took careful aim and fired twice, dropping the fighter with the rifle. The second fighter abandoned his RPG and pulled out a pistol, firing rapidly in her direction while attempting to reach better cover. Sarah tracked his movement through her scope and fired once, ending the threat. She quickly secured the RPG launcher, knowing it could be used against her fellow soldiers if left in enemy hands. By this point, Sarah had eliminated or neutralized 5 enemy positions, but her aggressive tactics had come at a cost. She had taken a bullet through her left shoulder during the engagement at the 3rd position, another through her right thigh, and shrapnel from a grenade explosion had peppered her back and arms. Despite her wounds and exhaustion, Sarah could see that one major threat remained. On the highest point of the ridge, a Taliban commander with a sniper rifle was systematically targeting the convoy below. Through her binoculars, She watched as he lined up shots on her fellow soldiers who were trapped behind their damaged vehicles. The climb to reach the sniper's position was the most difficult challenge yet. Her wounded leg made movement painful, and blood loss was beginning to affect her coordination. Each step up the rocky slope required tremendous effort, and she had to stop frequently to rest and apply pressure to her wounds. As Sarah approached the final position, the Taliban sniper detected her movement and swung his rifle toward her location. She had perhaps seconds before he acquired her as a target and fired. Rolling behind a large rock, she heard the crack of his rifle and felt the bullet pass close enough to her head that it displaced her helmet. The duel that followed tested every skill Sarah had learned during her military training. Both soldiers were accomplished marksmen, and both understood that whoever made the first mistake would likely die. They maneuvered carefully among the rocks, each trying to gain a position advantage while avoiding exposure to the other's weapon. Sarah's smaller size again proved advantageous, allowing her to move through spaces the larger Taliban fighter could not navigate. She managed to flank his position and get within effective range, but as she prepared to take her shot, disaster struck. The sniper had anticipated her movement and prepared an improvised explosive device using a hand grenade. As Sarah moved into position, the explosion knocked her backward and sent her rifle flying into a crevice between the rocks. She found herself wounded, disoriented, and weaponless, facing an armed enemy who was already moving to finish her off. With her primary weapon lost and her sidearm damaged by shrapnel from the explosion, Sarah faced the most desperate moment of her military career. The Taliban sniper approached her position confidently, believing the small American soldier was finished. But Sarah's training had included extensive hand-to-hand combat instruction, and her determination to protect her fellow soldiers gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. As the enemy fighter rounded the rock where she lay wounded, Sarah launched herself at him in a surprise attack that caught him completely off guard. The brutal close-quarters combat that followed tested not just physical strength, but mental toughness and tactical thinking. Sarah used every technique she had learned, fighting with a ferocity that surprised her opponent and herself. Despite her smaller size and multiple wounds, she managed to gain control of the situation and eliminate the final immediate threat to her convoy. But even as Sarah secured the high ground and began providing overwatch for her fellow soldiers below, she realized that their ordeal was far from over. Radio intercepts indicated that enemy reinforcements were moving toward their position, and the convoy's vehicles were too damaged to attempt immediate evacuation. Sarah established a defensive position among the rocks and began coordinating with the survivors below, using her elevated position to direct defensive fire and call in accurate coordinates for artillery support. Her actions had bought them time, but the real test of her courage and leadership was just beginning. As the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, Sarah prepared for what would become the longest and most dangerous night of her military career. Wounded, exhausted, and running low on ammunition, she nevertheless maintained her vigil, determined to protect her fellow soldiers no matter the cost. As darkness fell over the mountains, Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from base command. A Navy SEAL team conducting a separate mission 15 kilometers away had come under heavy attack and was requesting immediate assistance. Their extraction helicopter had been shot down, and they were trapped in a valley with wounded teammates and limited ammunition. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the radio with grim authority. "Martinez, I know you're wounded, but you're the only one in position to provide overwatch for a rescue mission. A quick reaction force is en route, but they'll need someone to guide them through the valley and provide sniper support." Sarah looked down at her wounds, feeling the weakness that came with significant blood loss. Her left shoulder burned with pain every time she moved, her right leg could barely support her weight, and dozens of shrapnel wounds covered her back and arms. Any reasonable person would have declared themselves unfit for further combat operations. "Roger that, sir. I can provide overwatch," Sarah responded, her voice betraying none of the doubt and fear she felt inside. The quick reaction force arrived within an hour, consisting of 8 soldiers and 2 heavily armed Humvees. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, her old drill instructor from basic training, stepped out of the lead vehicle and looked up at the ridge where Sarah had established her position. "Martinez, you've done enough. Let us handle this." His voice carried over the radio. "Negative, Sergeant. I know this terrain better than anyone, and I have eyes on the entire valley. Those SEALs need every advantage we can give them," Sarah replied, adjusting her position to get a better view of the route the rescue team would need to take. What followed was one of the most complex rescue operations in recent military history. Sarah served as the eyes and ears for the ground team, using her elevated position to spot enemy movements, direct the rescue force around ambushes, and provide precision sniper fire when needed. The SEAL team was trapped in a rocky outcropping 2 kilometers from where the rescue force could safely approach with their vehicles. Between them lay a maze of ravines, boulder fields, and potential ambush sites where Taliban fighters could be hiding. Sarah had to guide the rescue team through this dangerous terrain while simultaneously watching for threats from multiple directions. Her first challenge came when she spotted a 6-man Taliban patrol moving to intercept the rescue force. Using her captured sniper rifle, Sarah engaged the patrol from extreme range, her shots echoing through the valley like thunder. Her marksmanship training proved invaluable as she systematically eliminated the threats before they could alert other enemy forces to the rescue operation. Tango down, 6 enemy fighters eliminated. "Path is clear for advance to checkpoint Alpha," Sarah transmitted, her voice professional despite the pain that shot through her wounded shoulder with each rifle shot. As the rescue team advanced deeper into enemy territory, Sarah coordinated artillery strikes on suspected enemy positions, called in air support from circling Apache helicopters, and provided real-time intelligence on enemy movements. Her small radio became the lifeline connecting all elements of the complex operation. Halfway to the SEAL team's position, disaster struck again. An enemy rocket-propelled grenade disabled one of the rescue vehicles, wounding 3 soldiers and leaving the team stranded in an exposed position with enemy forces closing in from multiple directions. Sarah could see the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. From her position on high ground, she counted at least 20 enemy fighters moving through the rocks toward the trapped rescue team. The odds were overwhelming, and without immediate action, the entire mission would end in catastrophe. Making a decision that would later be called either incredibly brave or completely insane, Sarah abandoned her overwatch position and began moving down the mountain toward the fight. Despite her wounds and exhaustion, she intended to personally reinforce the rescue team and help fight their way to the trapped SEALs. "Martinez, what are you doing? Get back to your overwatch position." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Sir, you need every rifle you can get down there." "I'm coming to you," Sarah replied, half sliding and half running down the treacherous mountain slope in the darkness. The descent was a nightmare of loose rocks, hidden crevices, and enemy fire. Taliban fighters spotted her movement and began shooting at the small figure moving through the shadows. Sarah used every bit of cover available, moving in short rushes and returning fire whenever she had a clear shot. She reached the disabled rescue vehicle just as enemy forces launched a coordinated attack from 3 directions. The next 20 minutes became a desperate firefight with survival depending on teamwork, accurate shooting, and sheer determination. Sarah took position behind the damaged Humvee and began engaging targets with methodical precision. Her exceptional marksmanship allowed her to make every shot count, conserving ammunition while eliminating threats that posed the greatest danger to her fellow soldiers. During the height of the battle, enemy fighters managed to get within grenade range of their position. Sarah saw one Taliban fighter prepare to throw a fragmentation grenade that would have devastated the wounded soldiers taking cover behind a vehicle. Without hesitation, Sarah left her covered position and tackled the enemy fighter, preventing him from throwing the grenade. The hand-to-hand combat that followed was brutal and decisive, with Sarah using her knife skills and close-quarters combat training to neutralize the threat. As she returned to her position, a burst of automatic weapons fire from a hidden enemy position caught her in the open. 3 more bullets found their mark, adding to her already serious wounds. 1 bullet grazed her skull, another penetrated her right arm, and a third struck her in the lower abdomen. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez watched in amazement as Sarah continued fighting despite wounds that would have incapacitated most soldiers. She reloaded her weapon, took careful aim, and eliminated the enemy fighter who had shot her, all while blood ran down her face from the head wound. "Martinez is down. We need a medic," one of the soldiers shouted. "Negative, I'm still in the fight," Sarah responded, though her voice was noticeably weaker than before. The rescue team finally fought their way to the SEAL team's position, where they found 3 wounded Special Operations soldiers who had been defending their position for over 6 hours. The senior SEAL, Master Chief Petty Officer Davis, looked at the small, blood-covered soldier who had helped coordinate their rescue and shook his head in disbelief. "You're the sniper who's been covering us all night?" he asked Sarah. "Yes, Chief. Let's get everyone out of here," Sarah replied, already scanning the surrounding area for threats during the evacuation. The extraction was every bit as dangerous as the rescue mission. Enemy forces had regrouped and were attempting to prevent the combined American force from reaching safety. Sarah, despite her 5 bullet wounds and numerous shrapnel injuries, continued to provide rearguard security as they moved toward the extraction point. When helicopter gunships finally arrived to provide close air support for the evacuation, Sarah was one of the last soldiers to board the rescue aircraft. She had personally accounted for over a dozen enemy fighters, saved the lives of multiple American soldiers, and completed one of the most successful rescue operations in recent military history. As the helicopter lifted off and headed back to base, Master Chief Davis sat beside the wounded soldier who had risked everything to save his team. "What's your name, soldier?" "Martinez, sir." "Specialist Sarah Martinez," she replied, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion and pain that adrenaline had been masking. "Well, Martinez, you just saved the lives of 3 Navy SEALs and showed more courage than I've seen in 20 years of special operations. The Navy owes you a debt we can never repay." The helicopter medic worked frantically to stabilize Sarah's condition during the flight back to base. She had lost significant blood, and several of her wounds required immediate surgical attention. As they prepared to land at the base hospital, Sarah remained conscious and alert, still concerned about the welfare of her fellow soldiers. The aftermath of Sarah's actions rippled through the entire military community. Her heroism became legendary among soldiers who serve in Afghanistan, and her story challenged every stereotype about women in combat roles. Military leadership at the highest levels took notice, and recommendations for major commendations began flowing up the chain of command. During her recovery in the base hospital, Sarah received visits from generals, politicians, and fellow soldiers who wanted to meet the small woman who had redefined courage in combat. She was recommended for the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration for valor in action against enemy forces. More importantly, Sarah's actions led to policy changes that opened additional combat roles to women and demonstrated conclusively that courage, skill, and determination were not limited by gender. Military training programs began incorporating her tactical innovations, and her story became required reading at military academies. When reporters asked Sarah about her motivation during those desperate hours in the Afghan mountains, her answer was characteristically modest and direct. "I was just doing my job. My fellow soldiers needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. That's what soldiers do for each other." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had initially doubted her capabilities, became one of her strongest advocates. "I was wrong about Martinez from day one. She didn't just prove that women can handle combat. She proved that the best soldiers come in all sizes and both genders. I'm proud to have served with her." The 5 bullet wounds Sarah sustained during that night became symbols of her determination and sacrifice. Each scar told a story of a moment when she could have quit, but chose to continue fighting for her fellow soldiers. Her recovery was long and difficult, but she returned to active duty and continued serving her country with distinction. Sarah's story spread far beyond military circles, inspiring young women to pursue careers in traditionally male-dominated fields and challenging societal assumptions about physical strength and combat effectiveness. She became a symbol of determination, proving that heroism was not about size or gender, but about character and commitment to others. Years later, as a senior non-commissioned officer, Sarah would train new recruits and tell them the same thing Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had told her during basic training: prove me wrong. The difference was that now, everyone expected her to be right about the potential she saw in young soldiers, regardless of their background or appearance. The night Sarah Martinez survived 5 gunshot wounds and helped save a Navy SEAL team became more than just a combat action. It became proof that courage knows no boundaries and that the most unlikely heroes often accomplish the most extraordinary things. Her legacy continued to inspire soldiers long after her retirement, reminding them that sometimes the smallest person in the room possesses the biggest heart and the strongest spirit.